There is a reel of tape, held now in a university library in New Hampshire, on which you can hear a grown man scream. His name was Barney Hill, a postal worker from Portsmouth, and on the tape, he is on a couch in a Boston psychiatrist's office in 1964, under hypnosis. 3 years after a night he could not otherwise account for. What comes out of him is not a story. It is a man, back inside the worst hour of his life, with the door shut behind him. The Hill tapes are not testimony. They are a recording of two people going back inside it, not telling it, but in it. And whatever crossed their path that night, you have to account for the sound. Two people make returning to the worst thing that ever happened to them and finding it still there. I want to start with what is not in dispute, because it is more than you would think. On the night of September 19th, 1961, Betty and Barney Hill were driving home to Portsmouth from a short vacation in Montreal, south through Franconia Notch on US Route 3. The road was nearly empty, the moon bright. Betty saw a light first moving. She said, "In a way a star does not, a plane does not." Over the next hour it seemed to close the distance. These are not two people primed to see something or with anything to gain by it. Betty was a child welfare social worker, Barney a postal worker, and World War II veteran who sat on a local board of the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. They were NAACP members, an interracial couple in 1961, which made a story like this a liability, not a prize. For a couple already watched, already judged, the last thing you court is a headline letting an unfriendly town call you unstable. Whatever drove them into a psychiatrist's office, it was not a hunger to be looked at. They were already looked at enough. What happened next, on the ordinary record before any hypnosis, is this. They got home around dawn, hours late. Their watches had stopped and never ran again. Betty's dress was torn, Barney's good shoes scuffed raw across the tops as if dragged, and there were shiny concentric spots on the trunk of the car. Between the light in the sky and their own driveway were roughly 2 hours, neither could find. Not hazy. Gone. That is the part I keep coming back to, because it does not depend on anyone believing anything. 2 hours missing from two people at once. A stopwatch is a stopwatch. 2 stopwatches and a torn dress and scuffed shoes, and a 2-hour hole, all on one night, is a different kind of fact. You don't need a spaceship to find that strange, only to have tried to lose 2 hours of your life and failed. They did not go looking for aliens. The story is usually told backward. In the 2 years after, Betty began having nightmares vivid, repeating, the same rooms and figures. And Barney's body came apart. An ulcer, rising blood pressure, exhausted in a way sleep didn't fix, anxious with no object he could name. He went to a doctor for his stomach and his nerves, not for a UFO. And the doctor, hearing all of it, sent them to Benjamin Simon, a Boston psychiatrist who had used hypnosis on traumatized soldiers whose minds had sealed off what they survived. Simon did not believe they had been abducted, and said so for the rest of his life. He believed something on that road had frightened them enough to make them ill, and that hypnosis might reach the sealed hours and let the pressure out. Beginning in early 1964, he hypnotized them separately, on purpose, neither present for the other's session, so neither could hear or shape an account to match, and he recorded all of it. Those are the tapes. Here is what is on them, the center of the case, and the place where the ground goes soft under your feet. Under hypnosis, separately, both described the same night. A craft being taken from the car. A ramp, a corridor, a room. Small figures, not human, gray-skinned, large-eyed, who moved them onto tables and examined them. Betty described needles, a long one pressed into her navel that she was told was a pregnancy test, a procedure no doctor of 1961 would have recognized, but which reads now like one that wouldn't exist for years. She described a leader and a star map he showed her, which she drew afterward from memory, and Barney described the eyes. This is the part that is hard to sit with. Barney, calm in ordinary life, who by every account did not want any of this to be true, comes apart describing the faces. He fixes on the eyes. He says they are looking at him and he cannot get away. And then the thing I keep coming back to, that he has never, in his whole life, been looked at like that. Hold that sentence. It will matter twice more before we're done. And this private man, who spent his waking life managing exactly how he was seen because a black man in 1961 had to, begins to sob, then to scream, the sound of someone cornered, while a doctor's calm voice tries to bring him up. It is not the sound of a man telling a lie. Whatever else it is not that. And here I have to run the tape the other way, because anyone can play you the screaming and call it proof. And that isn't investigating, it's scoring a reaction. If the thing on these reels is real, it survives the hardest case against it. So, here is that case, and I am not going to soften it. The method is the problem. Hypnosis, we understand far better than Simon's era did, is not a key that unlocks a sealed room. It is closer to a stage where the mind performs whatever it is gently asked to. Picture Barney on that couch, a man who spent his life reading a room and doing what the moment required, now more relaxed and cooperative than ever, while the calm voice of a doctor he trusts asks, again and again, what he saw. That is not a neutral condition. A mind in that state does not only retrieve, it obliges. It reaches into the 2-hour dark, finds a stray image, a piece of a dream, and builds, confidently, an account so vivid the man himself cannot later tell it from a true memory. The Hills were not lying, but a suggestible man handing a trusted doctor exactly what the doctor keeps reaching for is not a witness, and a 2-hour hole is precisely the vacuum a cooperative mind rushes to fill. And Betty's nightmares came first. For 2 years before the couch, she had been dreaming. The abduction, the rooms, the figures, the examination, and telling those dreams to Barney. Simon himself came to believe that what Barney remembered was not his own buried experience but Betty's dreams, absorbed across 2 years of marriage and handed back, on the couch, as memory. Two people can share an account without sharing an experience. One only has to have dreamed it out loud, often enough, to the other. And then there is the television. On the 10th of February, 1964, an episode of the science fiction series The Outer Limits aired, called The Bellero Shield. In it, there is an alien with large, wraparound eyes, and a line about eyes that speak. 12 days later, on the 22nd, Barney sat in Simon's office and under hypnosis described the being's eyes for the first time. Large, wraparound, communicating without speech. A skeptic named Martin Kottmeyer laid this side by side years later and argued the uncomfortable thing that the most famous detail in the most famous abduction, the wraparound eyes that would define the alien face for half a century, may have walked into Barney's mind from a television set 2 weeks before he described them. I find that genuinely hard to answer because it goes straight at the eyes, the very thing that made Barney scream. He told the doctor he had never been looked at like that. The uncomfortable possibility is that he had, 12 days earlier, if the television was on. And it gets harder, because in Betty's earliest written accounts, from before the couch, the figures are described differently: short men, dark hair, large noses, of all things. Not the gray, wraparound-eyed beings of the tapes at all. The single most powerful image in the case, the eyes it all turns on, is also the one with a plausible arrival date 12 days before Barney ever spoke it. But the objection doesn't come through clean either. Nobody ever asked Barney. Kottmeyer built the theory in 1990, more than 20 years after Barney's death. And though Betty was alive and would live another 14 years, he never contacted her to ask whether they'd seen it. When another researcher finally did, she said flatly she had never heard of the show. Trust that as much as you like, but it is the only testimony anyone collected on the one question the theory rests on, and it points the wrong way. And the beam the theory stands on Kottmeyer's claim that wraparound eyes were almost unheard of, that he knew of a single instance in all of science fiction is shakier than it sounds. The Bellero Shield was one of a small cluster of Outer Limits episodes with large-eyed beings airing in those weeks, not a lone signal beamed once on one Tuesday. Big, strange eyes were ambient in the era which cuts both ways. That's exactly what a suggestible mind absorbs from anywhere. But it also means you can no longer point at one broadcast and say, there is where the eyes came from. So they may have come from a television set. But the case that they did is softer than its confidence. And the one person who could have settled it was never asked while she lived. And there is one piece the television cannot touch, because it isn't a face or a feeling. It's a drawing. Under hypnosis, Betty described a map, a chart of stars, points joined by lines she was told were travel routes, and afterward drew it from memory. A scatter of dots and lines, made by a social worker with no training in astronomy. For years, it was just an oddment in the file. Then, in the early 1970s, an Ohio school teacher and amateur astronomer named Marjorie Fish took it literally. If those dots were real stars seen from out there rather than Earth, could you find the vantage point? Using a catalog of nearby stars published years after Betty drew the map, Fish spent close to 5 years building three-dimensional models of our stellar neighborhood from thread and beads, sighting along them from every angle, and reported a match. The Sun and its neighbors, as seen from a double star called Zeta Reticuli, 39 light-years away. It ran in astronomy in 1974, and for a while it was the most electrifying thing in the field, a hypnotic doodle that seemed to encode a real star map. Its author could not possibly have known. That is the high water mark of the believer's case, and here is what makes it a scene rather than a footnote. The demolition arrived in the same magazine, the same issue. That December, 1974, astronomy carried Fish's interpretation, and beside it, a rebuttal from Carl Sagan and Stephen Soter, the claim and its unmaking on the same pages. Their point is hardest to feel and easiest to prove. Give the eye enough dots, and it finds a convincing pattern among some subset every time. Strip Betty's dots of Fish's lines, as Sagan later did on television, and the resemblance largely dissolves. Fish's stars were a handful chosen from many, and the map came from a memory recovered under hypnosis, the method we just watched. Manufacture vivid, sincere, untrue detail. A pattern found in dots, drawn from a suggestible memory, is not a message, it is a Rorschach. And the strongest witness against the map, in the end, was Fish herself. As better stellar data came in over the decades, truer distances, stars farther off or paired in ways her catalog had missed the match she'd spent 5 years building fell apart, and she said so, acknowledging publicly that the correlation now looked unlikely. The person who built the case is the one who withdrew it, the most honest thing anyone in this story ever did, and it should settle the map for good. Except for one splinter that won't come out. Betty drew the map in 1964. The catalog Fish tested it against appeared in 1969, 5 years later. Sagan is right that 15 dots always find a pattern, and that settles whether the map points at Zeta Reticuli. It does not settle the stranger fact that the drawing existed before the data anyone checked it against did. It doesn't rescue the map. But hold that shape someone producing a thing before the thing it would be measured against existed, because the case is about to hand it to you again, harder to put down. Put it all in one breath, and the skeptic's case is strong. 2 exhausted people lost track of time on a dark road. The fear made one sick and the other sleepless. And hypnosis, which we now know manufactures vivid false memory, was aimed straight at the hole, into which flowed Betty's dreams, Barney's dread, and the imagery of the age. If the couch were the only evidence, I'd tell you it was almost certainly built there, out of dread and dreams and a bad Tuesday of television. But the couch is not the only evidence, and that is the whole trouble. The reels can only record what 2 people said in 1964. They cannot reach back to 1961, and the physical things happened in 1961, before the couch. The watches stopped, the dress tore, the shoes scuffed, the 2 hours were gone, all before Betty had the first dream, or Barney, ever lay down. Hypnosis can manufacture a memory. It cannot reach back 3 years and tear a dress. Whatever the tapes are, they are an account of something, and the something left marks on the world before anyone was ever hypnotized. And there's the corroboration. Simon hypnotized them apart, so their accounts couldn't lean on each other. They converged anyway, two people, separately, describing the same craft, the same figures, the same ramp. The skeptic answers this well. Betty's dreams, told and retold to Barney across 2 years of marriage, could have seeded both, so that what looks like two witnesses is one dream wearing two faces. That may be right, and I want to grant that it may be. But notice what the skeptical answer still concedes. It requires that a child welfare social worker, in 1961, began dreaming in specific, structured, repeating detail an abduction narrative that essentially did not exist yet, before the words alien abduction meant anything to anyone, before there was a genre or template to borrow from. The Hill case is one of the first. There was no script for Betty to copy, because the Hills are a large part of why the script later existed at all. So take the skeptic's road to its end, and you arrive somewhere strange. A woman dreaming the future of a myth before it was written, producing the thing before the template it would be measured against existed. The same shape as the map that predated its own catalog, here again, larger. The mystery does not vanish. It moves upstream, into her sleep. I am not going to tell you that Betty and Barney Hill were taken from their car and examined aboard a craft by gray beings with wraparound eyes. The method that produced most of that account has put false memories into 1,000 other sincere people. The eyes may have come from a Tuesday night television show, and I cannot honestly hand you the tapes as proof of anything but distress.